Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the regular July meeting of the Minneapolis Charter Commission. I'll ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Commissioner. Commissioner Davis Carter is absent.
Yeah, your microphone's not on.
You have it right there.
Commissioner Fraser is excused.
Is excused. There we go. Okay. Can we start over? Sorry. We'll just start the roll call again. Commissioner Blue.
Present.
Commissioner Davis Carter is absent. Commissioner Dougherty.
Commissioner Davis Carter should be excused.
Oh, yeah, sorry. There's excused absence. Commissioner Dougherty.
Present.
Commissioner Garcia is an excused absence. Commissioner Hill is an excused absence. Commissioner Kozak.
Here.
Commissioner Menchie.
Here.
Commissioner Newport.
Excused.
Excused. Commissioner Perry.
Here.
Commissioner Rubenstein.
Here.
Commissioner Sandberg.
Present.
Commissioner Smith.
Here.
And Vice Chair Hawkins is excused. And Chair Black.
Here.
We have 9 present.
We have 9 members present. That constitutes a quorum. The next item is adoption of the agenda. Before we move on the agenda, I would like to suggest we add an agenda item after item number 6, the error report from the city clerk on the mayor and council's implementation and status of the government structure charter amendment. Can I have a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. That motion carries and the agenda is amended. The next item is to adopt the agenda as amended. Is there a motion to that effect?
Motion Sandberg.
Second, Perry. And moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on the agenda as amended? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. That motion passes and the agenda is adopted. The next item is the acceptance of the minutes of the June 1st, 2022 meeting. Is that the June meeting or the May meeting?
The May meeting, Chair Black, was canceled, and so is the adoption of the minutes from June.
Well, in June, we did not have a quorum, correct?
We did not have a quorum, however, there were minutes taken of the discussion that was had.
And if the May meeting was canceled, then should there be minutes from the April meeting that happened?
Correct. That is also listed here, the April 6th meeting.
Okay, so we're approving the minutes of the April 6th meeting and the June 1st meeting.
Chair Black, that's correct.
Okay. Can I have a motion to that effect? Move, Perry.
Second Sandberg.
Any discussion? I know that there were some people who weren't commissioners for those meetings, so I'll add the opportunity to give you to abstain if you wish. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say no. Any abstentions?
George abstain.
2 abstentions. That motion carries. Next is the chair's report, and I have a few items on my list to report. First, the Chief Judge of Hennepin County has completed appointments of 7 vacancies, and the judge has reappointed Commissioners Garcia, Kozak, Menchie, and Rubenstein, and also appointed Commissioner Sherry Boone and Commissioner Julie Dougherty, as well as Commissioner P.J. Hill, who is not with us today. He had a vacation scheduled before he knew he was appointed. So extends his regrets and his absence is excused. I will ask the 2 new commissioners who are here if they want to say a couple of words about themselves what words are from, etc., any information you want us to have on their background. And we'll start with Commissioner Booth.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on the board, or I guess what's the term, approving my tenure. I'm from the 11th Ward, and my background, in fact, I worked here in City Hall for a number of years as a space and asset manager, 2000 to 2003. My background is in space and facilities management. I also have a real estate license. And I have lived in South Minneapolis for over 30 years, have been active in the community, mainly with children and in the schools and such. And so thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Welcome. Commissioner Dougherty.
Hi, I'm Julie Dougherty, and I live in Ward 12. My precinct just changed, I found out, to 10 from 6. I have lived in Minneapolis since 1977. I'm a lawyer. I'm still a licensed lawyer, though I retired from my pay gig a few years ago. And I am looking forward to working with you all.
Thank you, Commissioner, and welcome. A couple of additional matters with respect to commissioners. First, Commissioner Tony Newborn has conveyed to both me and Casey that she intends to resign because of her workload at the City of St. Paul as HR manager. So I don't believe she has yet submitted that resignation to the judge, but will probably be doing so that'll be another appointment to add to his list. And I think I speak for all of us when we thank Commissioner Newborn for all her service, especially over the last few years when she's contributed a lot. And next, Commissioner Schwarzkopf completed his last meeting and is no longer a member of the Charter Commission. And I'm hoping I can work with maybe one or two others on the commission and the clerk's office to see if we can put together some sort of way to honor Lyle for all of his service and contributions over the years in his many, many different roles with the city of Minneapolis. So if anybody wants to help with that, just let me know, and we'll hopefully put together something for him at our next meeting. Finally, our August meeting, if we end up with an agenda like this where there is no action items and just reports, I'm inclined to cancel the meeting, and I would ask your authorization to let me do that and let me make the decision on the fly. Obviously, if something comes up that requires action, or if there is an amendment that requires our attention, we would have the meeting, but I would ask for a motion authorizing me to cancel. Normally, those cancellations are done by the chair, the vice chair, who is now excused from meetings, and the secretary, who is Peter Dinder, on leave from the commission. So I would ask you to authorize me to do that if appropriate for the August meeting.
So moved. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
Just a question then, would you be conferring with Commissioner, well, you can't confer with Commissioner Dinder, he's not on the commission anymore. So.
He's on leave.
Okay.
I would confirm with Commissioner Hawkins.
Correct.
Hearing no other discussion, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Okay, I will keep you posted on that and try and give you as much notice as possible, maybe the last week of July, so everyone would be able to adjust their schedules accordingly. So keep it on your calendar, but unless we have something come up that requires attention, I will cancel the meeting. And finally, last, I'd like to ask the city clerk, Casey Carl, to update us on efforts to televise our meetings. We talked about this a number of times before. before. I
Michael.
think we got spoiled during the pandemic because we were on YouTube. And now it seems like a loss that we are not. Before, it's always been a matter of budgeting, but let's see where we are today and what we can do next.
Mr. Chair and members of the commission, as the chair indicated, there have been ongoing conversations about the ability to broadcast certain meetings that operate within the city enterprise. The Charter Commission is one of those, given its independent and unique status as a board which really isn't a city board, but does have a significant influence over the city and its government structure as the holder of our constitutional city charter on behalf of the people. We've been talking with the mayor's office about what would be required to increase the capacity for broadcast certain public meetings beyond those of the city council and its committees. Currently, as we transition back into an in-person meeting format, we've also returned to the pre-COVID broadcasting capacity. And so that is limited to the city council, committee meetings of the council, our independent audit committee, the planning commission, and 2 meetings per year of the Board of Estimate and Taxation tied to their work on setting the tax levy. The Board of Estimate and Taxation, a separate elected body, recently took action to begin using its own budget beginning in next year's fiscal year budget 23 to broadcast their meetings. So the BET meetings will be broadcast starting in January 23. We've been working with the mayor's office and budget to try to incorporate additional funds that would provide broadcast support for what we like to call our independent or policy-making bodies. That would then include the Charter Commission and the Heritage Preservation Commission and the Zoning Board of Adjustment. So the Planning Commission, our third land use board, if you will, already is broadcast. This would be adding the Heritage Preservation Commission and also the Zoning Board of Adjustment and the Charter Commission. So I don't have a final answer on that other than to say that the mayor, the budget office, the communications, the information technology, my office, and we've also moved in council leadership on preliminary estimates of costs. And so that information has been provided, and we'll have to see how that comes out in the process of what the mayor recommends and then ultimately what the council adopts. So there is interest, I should say, from the mayor and from council leadership in accommodating those meetings that I just identified. So this body, potentially starting in January, would have its meetings broadcast.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Carl? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. That takes us to item 5, which is the even year elections work group. We had a report from this work group at our last meeting. And essentially, what it looks like is there are barriers in state law and regulation that prohibit us from having simultaneous ranked choice voting ballot and conventional ballot. And until that, there have been proposed changes to state law in the last several sessions that have not moved forward, brought by Fair Vote Minnesota to permit the conventional ballot and a ranked choice voting ballot on the same ballot, but that has not gone anywhere. It's been blocked by the Senate. So I'm going to suggest that we table our work on that work group and hold it until such time as it becomes possible, either because of a change in regulation or a change in statute, and then revisit it at that time, but not to close out this file, just to put it on hold. But we don't need to put it on the agenda for every meeting going forward. Does that make sense to everyone? In the report we had at our last meeting. Okay, unless there's an objection, that's what we'll do. The next item is the 2020 Redistricting Group After Action Review, and I will call on Commissioner Rubenstein to give us a staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you may all recall, those of you who were here, Chair Clegg had suggested that we work as a committee of the whole to consider the redistricting process and to look at what went well and where there was room for improvement. We had a meeting in May and beside the meeting, there are a number of very helpful suggestions and comments. Out of that meeting, advisory group member Jonathan Kim, Commissioner Sandberg, and I volunteered to write a report. We have a draft report, it's not ready for consumption yet, but it's getting there. And one of the things that we thought we might do at the very end of the report is extrapolate from all the comments some very specific recommendations for next time. And so today, I'm just requesting of all of you any suggestions you may have to include in the recommendations.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Commissioner Rubinstein? Seeing none, we'll look forward to that report in the coming months. Thank you. The item we added to the agenda was to add an agenda item after number 6, ask the city clerk to report on the mayor/council's implementation of the governance structure charter. Mr. Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. My name is Casey Carl. I have the privilege of serving as the city clerk for the city of Minneapolis. As the chair indicated, I'm here to provide a status report about work within the city enterprise to implement the new governance structure that was approved by voters during the 2021 municipal general election this past November. The new governance structure was an amendment developed and proposed by this body. This amendment implemented an executive mayor legislative council structure based on the well-known separation of powers model that exists at federal and state levels, and which is the model used in the majority of the biggest cities in this nation. So this slide provides you a high-level summary of the timeline and major activities that have been associated with our efforts to implement the new governance structure. The Charter Commission itself began this formal work, as you'll recall, on researching this issue and developing a proposal clear back in September of 2020. At that time, a work group was established to research and develop recommendations about government structure. That work group submitted its findings, and a formal report was then adopted by the full Charter Commission at its meeting on May 5th, 2021. And that was the report that then proposed the new government structure. That question was then submitted to voters at the last general election on November 2nd last year and was adopted. The amendment itself became legally effective 30 days later on December 3rd, 2021. Prior to that becoming effective, the mayor appointed a task force to provide recommendations on how an executive mayor operation could be structured in a manner that was effective and efficient and which could be sustained for a long period of time to enable the mayor to perform the myriad of duties as the city's chief executive and chief elected official. That work group was then appointed on November 18th. As you can see on the slide, January 3rd, of course, we swore in the newly elected and re-elected city officials for a new term, and as part of its organizational meeting, the council created a subcommittee on government structure so that all of the matters related to implementation of the new government structure could be focused in one place where all 13 council members could participate equally. Staff have made a series of presentations about the new government structure and related implementation efforts to that subcommittee, as noted here in the months of February, March, and April. Most recently, we also in June have had approval from council for the creation of 2 new executive level leadership positions that the mayor identified as critical to his proposed organizational structure. Those are a city operations officer and a community safety commissioner. At its regular meeting this last cycle on June 30th, the council formally authorized the creation of those 2 executive positions and gave notice of introduction of ordinances to amend the city code to create 2 new offices, the Office of Public Service and the Office of Community Safety. Here you can see Charter Amendment number 184, as it's been codified after approval by voters, did put in place this structure where city power is shared between the chief executive, the mayor, and the city's legislative body, the council. Under this structure, the mayor serves essentially in 3 very broad capacities. First, as the city's policy leader and chief elected official. The mayor is the only elected official chosen by a single district that encompasses the entire population and geographic boundary of the city of Minneapolis. The charter requires that the mayor enforce all laws and ordinances within the city and propose actions to improve the overall health, safety, and welfare of the community. The mayor is also the city's chief executive officer with accountability for day-to-day operations, the delivery of city services and programs, and of course, direct supervision of its departments. And finally, the mayor is the official spokesperson for the city government and is recognized under federal and state law as the head of the government for ceremonial purposes and also, of course, for purposes of continuity of government and emergency management functions. The council, the shown here, then counterbalances the mayor. They are the body of local policymakers that collectively are vested with the city's legislative, policymaking, and oversight functions. And in that way, the council enacts local laws to govern the community and public policies to guide and regulate the city government. Through its oversight functions, the council evaluates government performance and holds the mayor and departments accountable for results and outcomes. But the basic function of the council member remains, as it's shown in that last green box, that of being a representative and of representing their wards and their constituents. So this slide is a depiction of the organizational chart that reflects the mayor's proposed organizational structure. It's been submitted to City Council, and hopefully you can see a little bit of it here. It's a very small font. I think you also have a paper copy in front of you. You can see at the top of the chart, as I just described, the separation of executive and legislative functions between the mayor and the council. And then under the mayor, you have 4 direct reports. Shown in green, you have the office of mayor, which is headed by the chief of staff, who is responsible for the operation of the mayor's office and attending to the mayor's immediate needs. There are 3 orange boxes reporting directly to the mayor. These include the city operations officer, the community safety commissioner, and the city attorney. The city operations officer and the community safety commissioner are those new positions I mentioned. The city attorney is an existing executive position that remains unchanged under the new structure. You can see that the majority of the city's operating departments fall under the city operations officer in that block, directly reporting to that position. It's envisioned that the city operations officer functions in a capacity very similar to that of a city manager or a city administrator, with the primary responsibility for managing daily operations of all those departments as directed by the mayor. The community safety officer, the orange box farthest towards the left, plays a very similar role. However, it's exclusively focused on public and community safety functions. 5 departments will report to that position. Those are emergency communications, or 911, emergency management, fire, neighborhood safety, which would include the existing Office of Violence Prevention, and the police department. Taking a look at each of these executive positions, the leadership team then becomes those 3 orange boxes I just showed you. Each of these have a direct reporting relationship to the mayor that constitute a type of mayoral cabinet. Each of these executives have substantive control over the enterprise. The mayor would then certainly be able to add other department positions to that cabinet, either on an ongoing or a short-term basis. But that approach then gives the mayor the benefit of having direct access to the professional expertise and recommendations, both for short-term planning and for long-term strategy. Under the operations officer, as we saw in that chart, the majority of our operating departments are grouped according to similar functions. So there are essentially 3 major teams reporting up to the city operations officer. There's a group of internal services, and these are those departments primarily focused internally on the operations and management control of the enterprise. A group of communications and engagement departments. These are those primarily with an external focus, specifically aligned around messaging for the city. And then there's a department or a grouping of development, health, and livability, as it's called on the chart. These departments are primarily those that are focused on the physical, social, and economic development of the city. That leaves 3 departments that are not within one of those groups or silos that would have a direct reporting relationship to the city operations officer. That includes our public works department, civil rights department, and a new department, the race and equity department. You may be aware that race equity currently is a division of the city coordinator's office. The mayor proposes to pull that out and raise that up to a department level that reports directly to the chief operations officer. In terms of implementation, the mayor's office has established a series of internal teams that are working on implementation. They're shown on this slide. You can see there is a legal and legislative team that's working on drafting the various amendments, both the code and charter, needed to accommodate the implementation plan. There's an operations team. This is mostly led by our finance, property services, HR, and IT departments to really look at what does it take to implement this plan at an operational level. How many FTEs, how many new positions, what types of systems are needed, what's the funding required. And so the operations team is looking at that and the impact on citywide operations. The public service team, led by our current city coordinator, is looking at what it takes to organize, structure, and control the biggest grouping of departments. So that would be all of those departments ultimately funneling under the Office of Public Service, which is the new Chief City Operations Officer. The community safety team, currently led by our emergency management director, is focused on similar organizational issues about how do you structure, resource, and control the 5 departments that touch on public and community safety. And so there's a work group around that. Our race equity division is leading a team that's looking at the race and equity impact of this implementation plan. And they're preparing what we call a race equity impact analysis. You may remember that we did one of those for the ballot question itself. They're preparing another race equity impact analysis on government structure, and they'll be doing a race equity impact analysis for each of the ordinances that come forward, so that information can influence the council's decision. And then we have a communications team that's focused on strategies on how to inform both internal and external audiences about the work to implement the new government structure. In terms of next steps, what's been proposed to the council is a series of ordinances that would amend the city code. And this is to give us a short-term path to implementation, primarily so that we can start budgeting and operating under this new structure. We recognize that code amendments aren't a permanent fix, and that we do need to also align with charter amendments to make the new government structure permanent. There are some conflicts between what the charter would say and what our code amendments would say. We can't have those conflicts. But the good part about starting with the code, and why we're taking that approach first, is that it allows what I have called the try before you buy approach. So we can certainly take an ordinance, put it in place, and tweak it and refine it much easier than, as you all know, we can if we were to amend the charter and then have to come back and amend the charter. It's quite a harder task to amend the charter. So by starting at the code level with ordinance amendments, we can implement those changes through code, see how they work, make changes if we need to make them, and then we would come back later and bring forward charter amendments that would codify that structure within our constitution, our city charter, on a more permanent level. So we're starting with the code amendments. Ultimately, we know we need to have the basic form codified within charter amendments. In order to do that, there are, of course, as this body knows, 2 ways in which the ordinances to amend the charter could come forward. There are charter amendments that could be done by ordinance, which would require a first look by this body to say that yes, we generally concur that those are in line with our intent and in keeping with the spirit of the charter as it is. With the Charter Commission's approval, then it would go to the City Council for its work, for a public hearing. Ultimately, it would require a unanimous vote of the entire body, a 13-0 vote of the council, and the approval of the mayor. So it's a very, very high bar. And before becoming approved, that would then be subject to a 60-day protest petition period, at which point any member of the public can file a petition, assuming it meets the required statutory number of signatures. It would be referred to the voters instead. So because the ordinance process bypasses the voters, there's always that provision for them to kick it back to the electorate. That would be our preferred path, because there are an extensive number of amendments we would want to make in conjunction with this body. If that path doesn't work, of course, we could simply come to this body and propose that you refer those directly to the voters as a ballot question. So there are 2 different paths that those charter amendments could be brought forward. We would like to do the process of amending by ordinance, the administrative process, as I mentioned, the higher bar. But we think that starting with the code process is, again, allowing us to feel what that new structure would be like before we commit to it. So another reason to delay charter amendments in preference to code amendments. In terms of what's already been done, on June 30th, notice of intent was given at the council meeting to begin this process of code amendments, to amend the code in order to create the new Office of Public Service that I mentioned and the Office of Community Safety. We anticipate that at the next council meeting, following the standard legislative process prescribed both by charter and the council rules, the formal introduction, first reading, referral would come forward to the council meeting on July 21st, and it would go then in the next cycle to the Committee of Reference. That is our standing subcommittee on government structure under the Committee of the Whole, and that they would then be the committee that oversees working with the attorneys and others the finalization of those ordinances. I have TBD on here when formal action would take place. Of course, it could happen as soon as the next cycle after August 4th. It could happen several cycles after that. That would be dependent on the council and how quickly the draft ordinances are finalized, the public hearing is completed, and action is ready. But at least that gets us into August for a series of ordinances to come forward to begin the process of implementation. That also, I will point out, for those of you who are very familiar with our charter, August 15th is the day the mayor brings forward the proposed budget for the next fiscal year, 2023. And so there are a lot of work internally happening to align both the implementation of these ordinances and work on the 2023 budget going on at the same time. If you aren't aware, we have a website. I've taken a very small screenshot of that here. Apologize for how difficult it is to read. The web address is at the top. We've been posting all of our information to this site to make it available to the public. There are details about the proposal that tie into the Charter Commission's work, details about the timeline, the ballot question itself. All of the reports that have been given in public to the Committee of the Whole are also posted there, along with different reports and presentations. And just recently, I completed work with the Attorney's Office. I hope you have a handout. This is a sort of frequently asked questions and answers to those questions. We'll be posting that to the website as well today or tomorrow. So learning more from this website that we try and keep current. That's my somewhat brief presentation, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. Are there any questions for Mr. Carl? Commissioner Rubinstein.
Mr. Carl, I noticed that you make reference to the city coordinator and this implementation phase. Does that role drop out? I don't see it anywhere in the chart.
Right, so through the chair, Commissioner Rubinstein, the role of city coordinator has been identified as a role that would be eliminated with the creation of the city operations officer. And so the creation of the city operations officer allows for us to transition things from city coordinator to city operations officer. The position itself has been created, and when the council created the position, they also put aside funds for a search process. And so now that that position has been created, it's to the mayor and the mayor's team and HR to decide how we're going to move forward on that. But the creation of that position was done so that as we do the implementation the rest of this year, eventually we would transition to a city operations officer, and what is currently the city coordinator would disappear, meld into that new city operations officer. And then functions that are currently within the city coordinator's office, they talked publicly about having the ability to realign those elsewhere within the enterprise.
Are there other questions for Mr. Carl?
Thank you. I have a question about the Community Safety Commissioner and the police department reporting to that person. How does that comport with the charter amendment that says that the police chief reports to the mayor?
Commissioner Perry, through the chair, the police department, as you pointed out, under the existing charter, has an exclusive relationship to the mayor. The mayor is, in essence, the head of the police department. And so the police department will continue to report directly to the mayor. The mayor, of course, can have the Community Safety Commissioner be their designee and their delegate to carry out day-to-day controls and operations. But that designation does not remove the direct reporting relationship of the police department through its chief to the mayor.
Thanks.
Anything else? Any other questions? I would note, just as a matter of timing, that if this were to proceed as an amendment by ordinance, there is no timeline. That can start at any time. So it doesn't have to go to the voters. It can be recommended by the Charter Commission at any time. If this were to proceed not by an amendment by ordinance, but rather by the Charter Commission putting something on the ballot directly, then we would likely be tied to next year's general election, which is in November, and the timing for putting an amendment on the ballot, probably the deadline would be sometime in July or early August. So that's the two different timelines we would be looking at depending on how we proceed. Okay, seeing nothing further, thank you, Mr. Carl.
Thank you.
Before we get to public comment, I did want to note, we obviously have a number of new commissioners. We're going to have more new commissioners. What I'd like to do is have a complete orientation day once all the commissioners have been appointed and all the new commissioners are seated. I don't want to do it now because we'll have to do it again in a few months when we have more new commissioners. But in the meantime, I'm available to all new commissioners and have talked to them briefly about what we're doing and where we are. and we'll bring people up to speed as needed until we can have a more permanent orientation later in the year. And then we'll ask our city attorney, Carol Machine, to be part of that, Casey Crowd to be part of that, and others as well. So now we'll move on to public comment. We take public comment at the end of every meeting. Is there any public comment from any members of the public who wishes? Seeing none, a motion to adjourn is in order.
So moved, Sandberg.
Second, Rubenstein.
Been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned. And again, the August meeting, stand by for notification in the last week of July. This is sort of the quiet part of the year because it's too late to put an amendment on the ballot for this year. So in all likelihood,